Welcome to the broadcast, everybody, and thank you very much for joining me. I've watched Volume 2 of At Home with the Harkles and made some notes. And I'm going to try and whiz through them so as not to bore you, but this is in the style of a raw ramble, off the top of my head, just glancing over my notes. So it is what it is, my dears. That's all I can do for you today. And I know some of you quite enjoy that style. You can do the vacuuming or do some dusting with me in the background. So take it in that spirit and let us begin. I think my biggest takeaway from this whole debacle, this vulgar show, and it really is a tawdry cabaret, no matter how beautifully produced it may be, or how expertly edited, there's no getting away from the fact that it's a tawdry cabaret because it is hanging out your bloomers, your skid-marked bloomers and dirty laundry in public for the world to see, you know? Yes, a lot of it revolves around a public institution, but it also is the inner workings of a private family who have always been shrouded in some element of mystery, and I think they still are, despite this. And you'll see Catherine's air of mystery together with the Prince of Wales as they attend the carol service tonight, in gorgeous contrast to the world of celebrity, because that is the takeaway. Not truth bombs, because they were quite weak and feeble in my humble opinion. I think, don't believe the hype, but absolutely the big takeaway is how subsumed Harold Windsor is in the world of celebrity. And it's like, well, pick your team, and that's what he's picked, the world of celebrity, and pick your attitude to life. There is some sort of logic to the way that they process their information, but it is the logic of those who have acquired a woke way of thinking, those who spend maybe a little too many hours on the psychotherapist's couch, and in parts it is certainly the language, including all the talking heads that pop up to do their bidding throughout this documentary. It is certainly the language of the critical race theory. That, folk have forgotten, is a theory. It's not an established, immutable fact. It is a theory. Even though we only have one side of the story and we are unlikely to receive a riposte or a response from the other side, both Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace have already said that they will not be responding to today's broadcast, and I think that is absolutely excellent. I stand right by it, and they are channeling the royal spirit, my dears, not the celebrity one. So I approve of that. So we must understand that however compelling their voices have been to some, it is only their voice, and there are many sides to a tale and many different aspects that could be seen through different lenses. We only get to see it through their lens. But bearing that in mind, it was actually quite enlightening to see, from a behind-the-scenes point of view, some of the incidents that we all know about and where it looked from their standpoint. I found that quite helpful, and in many parts I found it quite reasonable. It kicked off with a few words from Claire Waite-Keller, actually. She was one of the first talking heads, and she's the woman who designed Meghan's gown. And I've heard rumours in the past that she had fallen out with Meghan, but absolutely not. She seemed to have nothing but good things to say about her. And we heard from Harry, who gave a rather reductive view of the British public, but I can see how he's come to that conclusion. But you do hear a hint of resentment in his voice when he talks about them. He loves them, but, they always saw him as Diana's boy, and when Diana died, they felt protected over him. And they had this expectation for a public wedding. This is what he was talking about. Because as we know, they would have preferred a private do. They had a private do in the garden with the Archbishop. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. But the public had an expectation, and the undercurrent of what he's saying is that we wanted to do it, for them. We understand that they see me as their child, they're clutching me to their bosom, so we wanted to honour that. There was a mission to get him married down the aisle and get the job done. Well, I suppose so, my dear, but it wasn't the most pressing worry on everybody's mind, I can assure you. It's not like the entire British population were thinking about you every day. When's he going to get married? When's he not? Everyone just assumed you were out having fun and getting naked around the billiards table as usual. But you got there in the end. Well done. And thank you so much for putting on such a spectacle for us. You really are so utterly generous. But that said, he credited his father for helping choose the orchestra at the wedding, the gospel choir and the orchestra. And actually the gospel choir we hear was put together with a collection of gospel singers from various different choirs to create what they called the Kingdom Choir, which was quite nice. And that choir was absolutely gorgeous. I'm a great fan of the gospel church. I've actually spent a lot of time attending the gospel church with my friends and relations. And I've actually got a lot of beloved associates in the London and Community Gospel Choir who do, or used to do, an absolutely fabulous yearly gig at the Jazz Cafe in Camden Town. And sweet nectar from the angels dripping in your ear, it truly is. Anyway, I digress, don't I? But I love a gospel choir. I love gospel music, but I did not like the choice of song for that wedding. This is just a personal thing, but Stand By Me is obviously a classic, a well-loved sort of anthem, but for me, in that wedding, it was too hackneyed, it's too done, it's too popular. And I think there are much more beautiful pieces out there. Meghan mentioned the piece of music that Harry selected, possibly with his father's help, but that Harry selected when she walked the aisle. And as I've said to you before, it is such a stunning choice. It really is. And it actually made me cry when she walked down the aisle together with that boy behind her, sort of coming alive in ecstasy at the moment. I thought that was a stunning moment. I really thought it was a beautiful, beautiful wedding. But I didn't like that song. I didn't like the preacher. And Meghan tells us that Harry's dad is very charming. And they're the words Madonna used once, years ago, in an interview, you know, when she sat next to Prince Charles, because, like many Americans at the time, she had heard this, that, and the third, and was a passionate Diana fan, and the rest of it, and used to say to her friends, what on earth did Diana see in him? But she took lunch with him. And she said that he was absolutely charming, tossing his salad around, and having a good old natter, and that she found him very charismatic and she could absolutely see what there was to fall in love with. So Meghan's right, he is charming. Prince Charming. And it was she that asked him to take her down the aisle. She confirms that it was her suggestion and he gracefully accepted, the king-to-be accepted. And I still ask the question, why didn't she ask Doria, this great feminist? Nothing wrong with asking Charles, but why did she not ask Doria? Doria was right there. And to my mind, if the father's not available to give you away, no matter how old-fashioned that might sound, then surely the duty would fall to the other parent or another relation. Not that she had any other relations there, as we know. But I don't blame her for that. More on that later. I thought it was rather telling when they asked Harry what he was thinking when he looked at Meghan as she was coming towards him down the aisle, and he said, I was thinking, look at me, look what I got, look what I found. Which I suppose is rather sweet, but it does make the gal sound like a bit of a trophy, doesn't it? Meghan spoke quite pleasantly about the Queen throughout this documentary, she did, and she spoke about the nice day they spent together on the train, and when the Queen shared a blanket with Meghan, and they had quite a cosy relationship apparently, which is very nice to hear, and she is respectful to the Queen, she's careful, and she calls her Her Majesty. But we still have to bear in mind that had the Queen been living and breathing today, she would have had to witness all of this. Now, I am not going to go down the road of saying that she would have been broken-hearted, because I think I know better. I think I understand the Queen's attitude better, and although I do think, of course, that on one level she would have been extremely concerned and upset, we must bear in mind that she had a wonderful sense of humour. She was very spirited, and sometimes these catastrophes amused her. What I think I'm trying to say is that she was excellent at compartmentalising the different areas of her life, her public role, her private role as grandmother, and was able to have that sense of detachment. You know, she wouldn't be so introspective and linger and wouldn't be thinking about it for the rest of the week. She had to get on with the business of being Queen and getting out the corgis. Meghan spoke about how influenced she was about the horrors of the Grenfell Tower incident, when she befriended a lot of people who from that community. And I was very impressed with the relationships that she built with those women. They seemed very genuine. They seemed genuinely touched by her attention, and they seemed to have actually gotten something out of that attention, as well as genuine friendship with the gal. They all say they speak very well of her, and it was a practical form of assistance as well, because they went on to produce the cookbook with her help and sell it. So I have no complaints there. But then it was on to the famous Australia tour. The Australia tour. And she gets out the bump. She gets out the bump. Now, throughout this documentary, you get to witness a smorgasbord of documentary evidence of her pregnancy. Every stage of it. Photos, images, and videos. So for those of you who say, why don't we ever see them? Why don't we ever see the kids? I've always thought, why do you want to see them? They're not working members of the royal family anymore. Now you can see them. Now you can see them. Now, are we really going to parade on with this nonsense on stilts? These conspiracy theories out there about her surrogacies. You know, she uses the word birthed. I birthed these two kids in this thing. She tells us where Archie was born, the Portland Hospital, and mentions her doctor. There is no doubt in my mind, in fact I know and am telling you, that she is the mother of both children and carried both children to term and delivered them. And another child was lost to miscarriage. Not for one moment did I ever doubt that that was true. This is the reason I've never indulged any of these ridiculous conspiracy theories. And I'm sorry, my dears, but if after watching all 6 episodes of this, especially the last 3, you still have questions in your mind about the legitimacy of those children, then you need your head read. You do. You need your head read. And you've been led up the wrong path. Well, regardless, all this time they were documenting, they were capturing footage. Oh yes, they were hard at work behind the scenes. They even show Archie in utero in the form of a ultrasound scan. And Meghan's friend, Lucy Fraser, who pops up many times during this documentary series, she pops up to speak on the popularity that Harry and Meghan were enjoying in Australia, because everyone was going absolutely bonkers for them. And Lucy Fraser says internal at the palace were becoming incredibly threatened by that. And I do have to question that, only because it comes from Lucy Fraser. I'm sorry, what has she got to do with internal at the palace? And she comes over like a very nice girl, she does. But how does she know what was going on in the machinations internally at the palace and that they were becoming threatened by that? Yes, of course, Harry and Meghan have told you that. But how does she know? This is one of the problems that I do have with this documentary series. A lot of the dirty work is left to friends to do, to their lawyer, to their busy mates, to Tyler Perry, various celebs. Take your pick. A lot of the dirty work is left to them. A lot of the passive aggression comes out of Harry and Meghan's lips with regards to their families, but a lot of the rest is left to other commentators, which is rather cowardly in my opinion. Rather cowardly. Tries to get them off the hook. They then showed us a series of headlines emanating from the Australia trip, which went on about how Harry and Meghan are so wildly popular and how Catherine and William were snubbed from all the recent popularity lists. Which I found interesting, because the whole point they're making throughout this whole thing is that the media were against Harry and Meghan and everybody was briefing negatively about them. Well, if that was true, then who was briefing against Catherine and William in this circumstance? During the Australia tour. You know, it's a role reversal, isn't it? Do they not realise everybody has their time in the sun and everybody has a moment of disparagement in the press, and then the next minute you're popular? You know, that's how it goes, isn't it? But they took it all so seriously, which is another thing that is so apparent. It seems like they poured over every headline, every newspaper, particularly Harry, I'd say. And then a stinging comment, a stinging barb from Harry towards, one can only presume, William and perhaps Charles as well, but he says, the issue is when somebody is marrying in who's supposed to be a supporting act and is then stealing the limelight or is doing a job better than the person who was born to do this, that upsets people. It shifts the balance. How vulgar. I'm sorry, but that is so vulgar, so tacky, and I can only assume he's talking about William there. He's talking about somebody who was born to do it and comparing it with Meghan. Even if you're convinced it's true, even if it is true, for a brother to do that and say that on national television, anyone's brother, but especially a royal brother, to do that is such an act of betrayal, it really is. It's such poor form, bad form. And I'm sorry, my dear, but the proof of the pudding is in the eating. And despite your best efforts and your wife's best efforts, or so you say they're your best efforts, you failed. For whatever reason, you failed. William has not failed, despite all the criticism that's come his way because of you two over the past couple of years. He's still thriving, and as we saw during the Queen's funeral period, he is still loved and respected and admired by the people of this nation. So, go figure. We get quite a lot of clips of Diana throughout this series, including clips from the Panorama interview. And as we know, William never wanted that aired again. I can't remember if Harry was part of that statement, but never wanted it to be seen again. But they take every liberty with it here. He continues to want to make the point and draw the comparison with Diana's pain and Meghan's pain. And they speak about a time when they'd attended an event together with the royal family. They were all in attendance. And they stayed at Buckingham Palace overnight for bed and breakfast and came down the next morning and shock horror, they say. Meghan was on the front page of the Telegraph. Oh, she'd stolen the show, and all the headlines were about her. And Meghan said, oh my God. And Harry said, I know, but my mum felt the same way. But they never really go on to explain why they were so mortified that she'd hit the front pages. I mean, the insinuation they're making is that the rest of the royal family, gathered around the breakfast table, would have been there sort of looking over and wishing that they were there. And why are they focusing on Meghan? You know, the suggestion is that they were either jealous or angry that Meghan was appearing there on the headlines. Well, I wasn't around the breakfast table, I'm afraid. I was busy on that day. But, you know, I can't say what made them feel that the rest of the royal family, or who knows, the Queen or Sophie Wessex or Catherine, maybe one of the gals, felt about being so-called upstaged by Meghan. Maybe I'm being very naive and they were sick with jealousy. But I think most of them have been in the game long enough to understand that the spotlight moves. Meghan was a relatively new member of the royal family, and of course the focus is going to be on her. And even if they weren't happy about that, I feel like they would have had the emotional maturity to understand that that was down to the press, not down to Meghan and Harry, so they couldn't really hold them responsible for it. They show a lot of newspaper headlines and compare favourable ones of Catherine to unfavourable ones of Meghan. And I see their point. I can see where it might be frustrating if you're the type that's there every day poring over every single newspaper and worrying about what the Daily Express think. I mean, really, who cares? Get on with your life. But I'm quite sure, you know, that if you really wanted to go back through the archives, you could do the same thing in reverse, with unfavourable ones towards Catherine, old weighty Katie, and glowing ones about Meghan. I'm pretty sure that you could do the same if you put your mind to it. And it was around this time that Harry seems to have decided that there was a racist undertone to the criticism. And another talking head pops up in the form of Gahinda Andrews, who is the author of The New Age of Empire. And he brought up one of Meghan's archetypes, one of her tropes of the angry black woman. And he kind of snuck it in there, though. He's another one that, on the face value of it, has been indoctrinated and is probably indoctrinating others on the theory and or the logic of critical race theory, because how he brings the trope of angry black woman into the mix out of the blue, just because a headline said diva. You know, this headline called her a diva, and as he's explaining it, he says, you know, they talk about, when they're talking about Meghan, the diva, or the trope of the black angry woman. No, they were talking about diva. No, they were talking about diva. As far as I could see in this article, they were not talking about black angry women. They were not talking about the trope of the black angry woman. They were talking about the diva. So he is the racist, in my opinion. He is the racist. He brought that into the mix. If anybody at all seems to be tarred with the angry brush, I would say out of all of them, it comes to the top of my mind, I would say it's William. He would get the most disparagement in that area. The trope of the angry white male, you could say. Meghan tells us when she was greeting the crowds in Liverpool, somebody berated her in the crowd and said, "What you're doing to your father's not right." And she said, "And then my entire centre was rocked to its core." And this is what set her off on a trajectory of rather dark thoughts, suicidal ones. And she said, all of this will stop if I'm not here. She said this to herself, and then she mentioned it to Doria and said that she wanted to take her own life, which is obviously enormously distressing, if it's true. Now, one of the frustrating devices that Harry uses throughout the entire series is the use of the word they to describe, they did this, they did that, they said that. There are some rare occasions where he names individuals. But a lot of the time, most of the time, it's they knew this, they knew that. And he says they knew it was bad for Meghan, but they thought, why couldn't she just deal with it? Everybody else has. Basically, what he was saying was that no one, they, could have been anyone, but they would not have conversations with the editor of various articles. Actually, I think this was with regards to the Daily Mail article. But we get a hint that he might have been talking about Charles, who said, my darling boy, you can't take on the media. My darling boy. And Harry said, I fundamentally disagree. And Harry describes the communications teams, the comms teams at all the households, who have their principal offices and end up working against each other, he suggests, leaking and planting various stories. So it all sounds a bit vicious and nasty. And he says that these various comm teams will trade stories about their principals. Harry says that William and I saw what happened in our dad's office and we made a pact. We made a pact years ago, he said, that we would never let that happen to our office. So it's very clear throughout this entire documentary that he is angry at William, very angry at William for not hearing him and Meghan, for not stepping in to help, for not shutting down various news stories, as head of the Kensington Palace household, for not chaperoning his teams, his advisors, his courtiers, and not doing more to rebuff various stories. And then Abby Spencer pops up, one of Meghan's besties, isn't she, the Abigail gal. She pops up, and she had the bright idea, because she really wanted to shift the narrative. I mean, she came across like a bit of a fruit drop. They all burst into tears at the drop of a hat, don't they? And there's no shame in crying. But these soggy faces, blub, 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 blub. No wonder the Queen looked bemused at them half the time. Well, anyway, Abby Spencer tells us, I called one of my closest friends, who just happened to be the editor of People magazine. So this friend interfered and says that she was the one who grouped together the 5 friends of Meghan to give her a rave review in People magazine. And by the way, Jenny Afia, the lawyer, says later on in this documentary that this interview was not authorised by Meghan, so how Abby went on to do that without Meghan's permission, we're not really privy to, but apparently she did. But one thing that I did find confusing about that is the choice of magazine. Okay, I understand it's because your friend, Abby, your friend was the editor of People magazine, but I still don't really understand how that choice of publication marries with Meghan's image, because surely the focus should be on the United Kingdom. Surely you could use your contacts to get in touch with the editor of an English publication if that's what you wanted to do. Why were you already trying to establish her image in America to the audience of People magazine? The famous baby shower, the expensive lavish baby shower, we find out was paid for by friends of Meghan. So for those of you who disparaged Meghan for having a lavish baby shower, it wasn't her. It wasn't her splashing the cash. It was her friends, all her fabulous friends. They clubbed together and did it. She tells us that when the time came to birth Archie, she began being worried about labour. She says she was older, so she didn't know whether she'd need a C-section. And she said that she offered to do a photo shoot outside the Portland hospital, but it was rejected by they. Again, they don't say who, just they. They rejected this idea because of the safety concerns, not being able to shut off the roads. It would have to be done sort of in the emergency entrance, kind of practical issues, but apparently it was rejected. And we're shown the footage of her 2 days later holding Archie after she gives birth. And as I've said so many times since the beginning of this channel, you can see the difference, can't you? You can see the difference in her swollen face. That is the face of a woman who has carried a child to term. And I'm told, I get berated by various mothers who say, I've had 10 kids, you've never birthed a child, I've had 10 kids, 20 grandchildren, I know exactly what mother looks like she's been pumping herself with hormones. No, you are the Fruit Loops. You are the Fruit Loops. She gave birth twice and miscarried once. Yes, she did. And I can absolutely see it on her face. And I do not care how many vaginas you've got. I do not care how many times you've spread your legs and given birth. I don't care how many decades you've worked as a midwife. I don't care. I don't care. I don't care. You are wrong. And it's very plain for me to see. It's always been plain to see. But this documentary did illustrate all of that. All of that. We get to meet the Zimbabwean nanny. You know, the one that slings Archie around her shoulders in a mud cloth? Her name is Lauren Kumalo, and actually she seems lovely. I've got to tell you, I can absolutely understand why Meghan has become firm friends with her and why they love her. She's gorgeous. I thought she was wonderful. She had a lovely spirit, and she spoke very highly of Meghan and Harry and said they're lovely to be around, informal, put her at ease at all times. Well, my dears, I've been prattling along, and I thought this would be a very quick broadcast, but I've only gone through 5 out of 10 pages of notes somehow. Oh dear, I do hope I haven't been boring you boobless, but I'm actually going to draw this broadcast to a close now, and I'll finish off the rest of my notes in another broadcast. So for those of you that have bared with me, for those of you that are still here, thank you. You've got the patience of a saint, haven't you, my dears? You must be crazy. But I appreciate it very much, and I will see you in the next broadcast. My tip jar is in the description box below, so if you're bored, there's something for you to do. And I bid you good day. I'll see you soon, and toodle pip.